I think that climbing in competitions is like, I mean, it's definitely like a sport pursuit. You're training to have a good performance and a good result. And that's kind of the goal. And it's definitely cool, but you're like the whole idea is comparing yourself to someone else. And I don't know. I never really like maybe I didn't realize it then, but like the motivation to do that just like wasn't quite there for me. And then when I could, see this like version of the sport where it has nothing to do with someone else. It's like your personal pursuit on a climb and it's I just found it much more inspiring and satisfying, I guess. It's just you versus the rock, and everyone who's there is there for the same thing, and no one like there's not this competition attitude, so it just feels like everyone's kind of on the same team, playing against the same opponent.
Tyler Thompson, welcome to the Testpiece podcast, man.
Hey Josh, how's it going?
Good, man. Tyler, I want to share how this chat came to be because we hadn't met each other before the pre-interview. I was texting with Noah and Ben Wheeler, and I was just asking them about younger up-and-coming climbers. Your name popped up, but then I hopped on Instagram and saw you had just sent your second 515 Death of Villains. And then I looked on YouTube and saw the amazing video of you getting the second ascent of Full Metal Brisket. Interesting name. Another 515 in the new. I decided I want to talk to this guy. So here we are, man.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. I appreciate that Ben thought I was strong enough to be on a climbing podcast.
Well, you might be stronger than Ben. I don't know. Like, how many 515s has Ben done?
How many hard board climbs have I done? I'm not quite sure. I
Dude,
can hang.
those are different things. They are just different things. Actually, they are really freaking different things, to be honest. Dude, before we get into it, as I said, Full Metal Brisket, which is that 515 in the new. What's the story behind that name? Do you know like where that name came from?
I don't know. It was called that before Jonathan did it. That's just what it's always been known for. I think three people were involved in the equipping, developing of it, and it was just always known as the Full Metal Brisket Project. And Jonathan probably just thought that was too cool to call it something different.
It is cool. I mean, I always like stumble over saying it because there's that you may not know there's a famous video called Full Metal Jacket that is an amazing film. But yeah, Full Metal Brisket, good one. All right, Tyler, you've got a couple of 515s under your belt. You've got 100 plus 514s already, which is incredible. But something that is absent in your climbing resume are a bunch of comp wins. I'm just giving you crap here because, in fact, you said something to me along the lines of, Josh, you probably shouldn't call me a comp kid. Not because I didn't do comps, but because I wasn't very good at them. And I'm not trying to be mean bringing this up. It just gave me a chuckle. And it's also funny because of how successful you are now. And I just wanted to start there and hear more about that. And then what shaped you into becoming such a badass climber now?
Yeah, it's not that I didn't try either. I trained kind of with the focus of that I wanted to go to the nationals and compete at a high level, but I just never could connect the like training with the performance in the competitions and never really did very well. But it wasn't due to lack of effort. I definitely tried. I think for me, like nerves or something just always held me back from doing well in comps.
Have you ever thought about do you feel like if you pulled on, actually, let me put it this way. When you go to gyms now and you sport climb, are you really good in gyms?
I'm decent, I think, but I don't know, comps like the climbs, the routes are always so different. I feel like I don't know. Part of me thinks it would be pretty fun to go do a comp, and then I remember like all my bad comp experiences where, you train so well and then like you're all nervous and I don't know.
Well, It sounds like you left comps gracefully. And can you tell me about that transition and what it was like?
Yeah, when I had been competing for a few years and just was really psyched on climbing in the gym, as most gym rat kids are. And I had some friends who would go out to the New River Gorge in West Virginia every weekend, and that was just the closest climbing area. It was still like a 5 hour drive or so, but one weekend, like I got invited to go with some friends, like maybe when I was 16, still like big into my comp kid phase, and I went out to the new for I'd been sport climbing before, but just like, with some team friends, like we would do team trips occasionally, but going with like just some outdoor climbers for the first time was kind of a totally different experience, I guess.
How long had you been climbing, like in the gym before you took your first trip out? Wait, so this wasn't your exactly first trip, but it was one of the earliest ones?
Exactly, yeah. I really started climbing outside. I would go to summer camp in North Carolina, starting from when I was pretty young, like 7. And they would, we'd do outdoor activities. They'd take us top roping out on, slab routes, like super easy stuff. And then when I was a little older, we would go like we did a trip to the Red with my dad and some team friends, and I thought I was pretty psyched doing that. But something about going with like not my dad, just like some friends and these people that were like really, really psyched on kind of climbing hard. And they had their projects. Like it was the first time I'd seen people who were projecting routes, and I could like immediately on that first trip kind of jump in with them on those routes that they were trying and like share that. And I saw climbing as more of like this lifestyle sport, whereas when you're competing in comps, I grew up playing sports, so like during most of my childhood, like up to when I was 16 or so, I was playing ice hockey. And for me, like climbing and ice hockey were kind of like equivalents. Like I'd go to practice during the weeks for climbing and have the odd comp. And then on the weekends, I would have like a practice and a game for hockey. And it was kind of like those were the sports I did. And then, around like seeing these people, they weren't going climbing as like a sport. It was like their lifestyle that they kind of like, they built their life around climbing because like it was just so special to them, and like getting involved in that like with them, I just saw it as like a completely different thing. And it kind of for me, like I found climbing in like a different way there, and my motivation completely changed, and I pretty quickly stopped playing hockey and like was all in with the climbing thing.
Dude, I like how you were saying that you're doing ice hockey and climbing. They were like kind of similar to you. And I know what you're saying where you're like, well, we train and we compete. But I like can't think of two sports like more different than ice hockey and climbing. But I mean, what you're saying there is really interesting where you don't really travel 5 hours to go do ice hockey in some remote, beautiful place. And I think you said this place was the New River Gorge, which I haven't been to, but those videos make it look beautiful, man.
Yeah, the New's a really special place, and I think I'm pretty lucky to have 5 hours. Like if you told that to maybe someone from Europe, they would probably think I'm completely crazy. But like by American standards, I don't even think it's that bad for like to drive 5 hours for a weekend trip. And I mean, I did that trip for the first time when I was 16, and I think like that first weekend just started like the next weekend I went, and then the next weekend, and it was just like that for many years.
You said that these guys that took you were kind of, I don't know, lifers or like living the climbing lifestyle. And I think you had told me that they weren't, they were older. They kind of like, invited you along. Is that right? That they kind of like say, hey man, you might like this?
Definitely, yeah. I think all of these guys I was climbing with were like in their 30s, because I mean, you didn't really find like other sport climbers my age, and like in Virginia, I should say, like in that region. I think, on the East Coast, the climbing is already like a pretty small community, and Virginia was like especially really tight, and you kind of knew everyone that was like climbing basically, and especially sport climbing was, no one very young.
Geez, in their 30s, ancient man, basically dead at that point. So you started going, and you said something like, "Oh, I found climbing," and yeah, what do you mean by that? Like, what do you mean by you found climbing?
I think that climbing in competitions is like, I mean, it's definitely like a sport pursuit. You're training to have a good performance and a good result. And that's kind of the goal. And it's definitely cool, but you're like the whole idea is like comparing yourself to someone else. And I don't know. I never really like maybe I didn't realize it then, but like the motivation to do that just like wasn't quite there for me. And then when I could, see this like version of the sport where it has nothing to do with someone else. It's like your personal pursuit on a climb, and it's I just found it much more inspiring and satisfying, I guess. It's just you versus the rock, and everyone who's there is there for the same thing, and no one like there's not this competition attitude, so it just feels like everyone's kind of on the same team playing against the same opponent. And
Yeah, yeah, yourself, yeah, or the
exactly.
rock, or the rock, whichever way you want to look at it. Dude, I kind of like that. I guess, I mean, I know what you're talking about. I know the climbing lifestyle versus like hardcore competition, but it just made me think how sports kind of funnel people into this, like, you do it on the weekends against each other. Like, that's, we're training for this. And I mean, even non-climbing sports, you got to think that there should be some deep kind of love of the movement or the activity, but I don't know, it feels disconnected from that. And I like you describing like, like I wasn't doing the thing, I was just competing, I wasn't really climbing. And then I just love the idea of like, I found climbing. So cool, man. I'm glad you found climbing. It seems to be serving you well. And so did you just start going every week after that? Was it just, yeah, what did you start doing when you would be back in the gym? You quit ice hockey, you're going to the new every weekend. What's your physical life look like now?
I guess my training probably didn't change very much, like what it looked like. I was always just going to the gym, doing the boulders and routes in the gym, like pretty unstructured, like what, I don't know, what a lot of kids end up doing. But I kind of think that like the motivation came from like a completely different place. And looking back on it, I don't think I was even training for like comps. It was like training because getting stronger felt good, I guess. It's satisfying to like see the obvious progression, and then going from that to like, well, now I have these projects that I want to train for. It felt much more like there's a purpose to it, I guess. And maybe I was even more motivated. I don't know. I was always like, I never struggled so much with motivation for training, but it definitely came from a different place.
Yeah, I like how you're talking about training, and you basically said what I do. It's like I go into the gym and I try to climb some boulders, but I try hard. Like I mean, I really want to do them, but yeah, that's classic. That's funny. Uh, so you said something about how it wasn't super popular to, well, Virginia maybe wasn't the climbing mecca, and there wasn't a bunch of kids around you pushing it. And he also said something about how maybe there wasn't a ton of sport climbers in Virginia either around your age. And that was actually one of the reasons I want to talk to you too, Tyler, is climbing has grown massively in the last 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, whatever. It's growing. And I'm sure sport climbing has grown, but it doesn't feel like it's grown as fast as bouldering. And that's just my feeling, but you're kind of more in that earlier generation. So just, am I right in that? Does it seem like sport climbing is lagging behind in growth compared to bouldering?
I definitely would say so. And I guess I'm not 100% sure why. I think maybe like bouldering is the ultimate like accessible type of climbing, you know? You don't really need any like immediate skills. Like you can just kind of have some shoes and a pad and go out and do it. But I kind of don't even think that's like the only reason. I mean, board climbing, I think I should say I think training translates can translate really well for bouldering and like board climbing, I think you can be really good on a board and go out and probably boulder pretty hard. But I think the sport climbing doesn't translate quite so well. Like going from the gym to going on some routes outside is kind of like a different sort of jump and maybe just doesn't translate as well. And so I think that the learning curve is maybe a little steeper and you just end up having to put in like more hours to maybe get to the same place that you could get to bouldering.
Yeah, I was thinking about this too, where if you climb, I don't know, V8 on a board or even V8 on a boulder in a gym, I feel like you can probably climb V6 outdoors or something. I don't know. I'm just making up grades. Doesn't matter. And I was thinking about this, like why it might be where when you take someone who's climbed V8 on the board and then toss them on 512 outdoors, how they may struggle. And here's just my this is just my guess, my taking a stab at it. So I think one of the issues is that on boards or on boulders, it's like this is where you put your foot. This is the hand you grab, and you grab it like this, and we can talk about it. It's like four moves, but when you have 100 moves and no one's telling you what to do, all of a sudden you are your climbing IQ or lack thereof from just kind of pulling on the boards a few times really becomes lane bare. So that's my guess.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when it comes to like routes, especially when you get to pretty long routes, like you were saying, like a hundred moves, there's not going to be one way to climb that route. There's probably going to be, I mean, nearly an infinite number of ways to climb that route, and a lot of them might even be the same difficulty. And I think people can get like lost almost in that ocean of choice that they have, and they can kind of hesitate so much trying to choose that they end up like massively increasing like the difficulty, and it can just seem so much more just hard to tackle all of that. But I don't think it necessarily it's harder.
Is that how you felt when you first went outside?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, I wasn't like the I think I mean I'd already been motivated to on like sport climbing comps. So like it wasn't that I didn't have any experience, on a rope or anything, but I definitely noticed the like learning curve right away. But I kind of got really psyched on that learning curve. Like I liked that there was so much room for improvement that wasn't anything to do with how strong you were. And you develop like your decision making skills, and there's just so many other factors I think that make sport climbing just really interesting to me. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure people feel that way about bouldering too. It's just like what kind of got me motivated in the first place.
Well, it's not like you don't boulder too. I mean, I'm sure you have bouldered plenty. So I mean, yeah, these little nuances that each sport, each discipline in our sport bring. This is why I always say like I like it all. I mean, and the deeper you dive in, the more intricacies you get to unlock. But you said something that I thought was really interesting, where you said, let me look at it so I can get the exact quote right. You said that you thought that sport climbing is the best first person experience in climbing. And the reason why I call it out is it's again, I'm kind of surprised that we aren't seeing as many sport climbers where even though I'm a boulderer, I actually feel like I have some very memorable sport climbing moments. So what do you mean by best first person experience in climbing?
Yeah, I mean, bouldering is so like it comes and goes so quick, I guess. And it's obviously like really fun to hang out at a boulder with all your friends and stuff and try hard, but there's no experience like being on a run out slab in the BRG and you can't even hear your belayer and the rock is unbelievably perfect and you don't know quite where to go. Like you just end up being so present and in the moment and for such a long time too. It's not for a minute or two. It can be for, 20 or 30 minutes. Like all you're thinking about is the thing right in front of you and figuring out how to get up this route. I just think that those experiences that bring us like fully into the moment where you just don't even have room to think of another thing are the best ones. And especially when it's on like something so beautiful like this perfect limestone face and you have good views and there's just nothing else like it, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm not gonna 100% agree. I'm gonna 98% agree because I feel like I've had similar experiences in bouldering, even trad climbing and deep bar soloing. But it is those moments where you just are fully dropped in. The the issue I always have with sport climbing, something like that, and spending 30 minutes in the zone is I feel like there's an equal amount of pressure I feel before pulling on. Where in bouldering, you're like, I'm just going to try this move. I'm just going to like give this thing a quick burn. And so that friction of starting seems lower it's like, how many burns do you get in a day when you're a sport climbing crag? And so there's a juxtaposition there where it's like, you gotta you got to be willing to jump in the deep end for 30 minutes.
But I almost think that's like where the value comes in. You can really appreciate the each attempt you have on a route because you might only get two in a day, and then you can really be, I said appreciative already, but like appreciative of the climbing itself. It's not as accessible. You can't just try the move 30 times off the ground. You like if you're trying to do the thing, you need to come from the ground, and you don't have so many attempts. But it makes it a little more special in that way.
You said that sport climbing rewards putting in a lot of time, like this whole idea of unlocking sequences, getting efficiency. Like, yeah, I guess the reason why I want to ask about that is that I feel like, well, of course, whatever thing you're doing, whether it's chess, we were joking about that earlier, rewards putting in a lot of time, but like, what is it about sport climbing versus maybe board climbing that you think requires or that really benefits from lots of time spent on the rock?
Well, I mean, part of it is like going back to what I said earlier about the training. I just don't think that you can really get specific enough training, in any other way besides just climbing on the routes you want to try. And even like going from one crag to another can be so, so different that like you almost need to train that one crag to be good at that style. At least maybe that's just my experience. Like I've never felt like even, you go and train endurance circuits on the spray wall and then you go outside and it's like I'm getting pumped. Why am I getting pumped? Well, there's so much more little factors that go into it than just like what your forearms are doing. So I think the only real way to get that like specific application is just to spend the time on the climb or at the crag in that specific style to feel good at those like at those movements.
Yeah, I have buddies who boulder a lot and then they get interested in sport climbing, or maybe it's hot and they're like, "Oh, like I should sport climb this summer." And their first go-to is, I have crappy endurance. I'm going to do a bunch of 4x4s or something. And I don't think that's the right attitude because then I see them pump out on 511 and maybe they're the 11 climbers. And, I don't exactly know. I can't put my finger on all the things that maybe a more experienced sport climber does that reduces the pump. But like if when you see board lords go out and sport climb, what do you see them often do wrong that isn't exactly just, oh, you have crappy endurance? It's like you're over gripping or you're doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I mean exactly that, right? Your sport climbing, if you look at it, it's most of the time the moves are not very hard for you, or maybe there's like one or two, but majority of the climbing is relatively low level for you, or like, you could be flashing all of the moves, but it's not about like if you could do one move or a couple moves, or it's about if you can like link all of them. And so if you're making like small errors on every move, it just compounds throughout the whole experience. And so it becomes like a problem less of if you can do the moves, I guess, and more of like optimization throughout the routes. And I think that like skill of like optimizing while you're climbing is maybe like not as um pronounced than some people. Like maybe that optimization skill is just not there for someone who hasn't spent much time doing just loads of moves that maybe are easy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those, Tyler. I am like, oh, I can do this move, so I'm just going to do it, right? Like I'm going to grab this hold, I'm going to stand up and grab the next hold, and I feel like bouldering often rewards. Well, I shouldn't say that. Moderate bouldering to even hard bouldering rewards kind of just straightforward pulling and power. But I've noticed this trend where a lot of the best boulders in today's elite level have a sport climbing background because fundamentally you want each move to be as easy as possible. And yeah, I don't know, like, is there any, I was going to say, is there any way to build up that understanding of movement without doing 1,000 moves? But that's kind of what you're saying is like, no, you got to show up and learn along the way.
Yeah, and I think it's the same with the best boulders, is we see that they have like pretty substantial like resumes when it comes to climbing. And if they've done lots of moves, and a lot of the hardest boulders now are really long, right? Like I feel like all these V17s we're seeing are like sit starts to hard boulders already. So
Yeah,
I
that's a good
think
point.
that, yeah, the optimization, they have those skills. And I'm sure like we're going to see some V17 climbers who maybe climb enough boulders they get psyched on some sport climbing projects, and I'm sure they're going to absolutely crush.
It's funny because you said you can probably flash all the moves, but it's all about linking them together. And what I remember is that typically in the earlier sport climbing era, it was like if you can do all the moves, then it's kind of a foregone conclusion that you can do the route because, hey, like you can do them all. So just put them together. And it's like flipped, like where people have gotten so strong and so into training and so into board climbing that and I'm one of these people, so I'm not making fun of them, but it is frustrating to me where I'm like, I can do all the moves. Why can't I just climb the route?
Yeah, there's just a lot more that goes into it. And I mean, that could be more fun too, but I think a lot of people struggle too with you need to be learning even after you've done all the moves. Like there's still tons to learn on a move you've done 20 times. And especially like in a section, maybe if you can break down your route into a boulder problem. I mean, how easily can you do that section becomes like so much more important, I think.
Well, how do you know whatever section you've broken down, whether it's a move, a crux sequence, or kind of like a bolt to bolt, like a boulder, like a rest to rest? How do you know where to start finding that efficiency when you're projecting?
I don't know if it's as focused as you might think. It's kind of intuitive. I would break down a route that seems like quite difficult, and I'm not immediately able to try red pointing it from the ground. You just kind of can look at it and like, how does it break down? Are there like resting points? Well, if there's an obvious rest in halfway up, the obvious thing to try would be to red point from the rest to the top of the route, because that's, you're going to get a similar feeling at the end in whatever red point crux there might be, but you're going to be fresher because you're not coming from the bottom. So like just the obvious breakdown is what I would look for, but it's always quite intuitive. I'm not usually like, oh, this easier section of climbing, like how can I optimize the foot sequence through it? Usually, you get the optimizations by climbing it over and over again, but I think you need to be pretty intentional, I guess, with what when you're trying that and what you're doing, like just making sure you're kind of really thinking about that sort of, or the climbing you're doing, but I don't think it needs to be so, so focused as like how you're saying, maybe.
No, you make me feel better saying that because I thought maybe there was some secret and you get hardcore analytical on some area, but that kind of mirrors my experience where let's say I think I can do a route, I'm giving it red point burns, and that's just not going down. And all of a sudden, then when I'm doing quote unquote like easier bits, I often put a little more focus there. I don't want to say I put focus in like I'm going to suss out the perfect beta. It's just all of a sudden instead of going on autopilot and just making it through a section, I go, can I don't know. I start showing up there instead of just kind of not considering it.
Yeah, the number of times you're thinking about when you pull on, oh, the crux up at the top, and then you end up falling down low in a different hard section because you were just thinking about the crux up top. Like, I think that that is super common, and I mean, there's some tricks to that, but ultimately it comes down to being comfortable on the route and having like a lot of experience doing those moves and just being like at least happy with your sequence. And
Okay, you said something about that you look at a route, maybe there's a big obvious rest in the middle. So yeah, you want to, what's it called? Like low point it from there? I don't know. There's some cool term there. Yeah, low point. Nice.
low pointing, yeah.
Okay. So this begs the question that we were talking about before. How do you know how long to rest at that break? Like when, yeah, just what are your tricks for knowing how long to rest at good rest, bad rest, mediocre rests?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if I have any tricks. I've really put some thought into this. When I was trying Death of Villains, there's a poor rest in the middle of it. And at first it was like I'm shaking each hand one time, and even those one shakes were like I wasn't resting. I was negative resting, you know. It was doing the opposite of what I wanted it to be doing. But I knew that I was going to need to rest there, so I like would always play around and try and find a better position. And it ended up when I was doing the route, I was resting there for like a minute. And it wasn't so much that I thought about like trying to rest like as long as I can or for a specific amount of time, but it's more just like feeling, just using the intuition of like how do my forearms feel, how is my heart rate, like how hard am I breathing right now, and just being kind of mentally satisfied with like how everything feels before I get going. I mean, it's almost more, especially with like a poor rest like that. It's more about like mentally, am I ready to execute in the next section and try really hard, or should I shake out two more times and just feel a bit more focused. But I don't know. There's definitely not a right answer. I see some people who rest much longer than me, and more often I see people who rest a lot less than I do. And I don't know if it makes a huge difference, honestly.
Say more about that whole thing where you part of the resting is just are you ready to set off and are you focused? I found that interesting because it didn't sound like it was exactly the same as I'm not pumped so I'm ready or my heart rate is down so I'm ready. It almost sounded just like a mental shift.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of times is that because at least looking at Death of Villains, you climb a very hard section up to a pretty bad rest, and then you have this second slightly easier section of climbing, but you're much more fatigued. And so the margin for error is pretty low, even though the section of climbing is like a section that I had done many, many times, like getting ready to try and red point the route. So being that the margin of error is so low, I kind of know that I need to execute each move really well and be in that like sort of flow state where you're not really thinking at all. Like that's just kind of how I like the zone I need to be in to climb something like that. And so like I need to prepare myself. I mean, it's the same when I set off. If the harder section is off the ground, I would get into that zone before I even leave the ground. But when it's on a rest, I think it's harder, and so I would just take the extra time to kind of get into that mode before I even I even get into the climbing.
How do you get into the mode?
It really depends on the climb. And I mean, for me, I have to just like have a completely clear mind and just be ready for whatever happens to happen. But I also, I mean, the biggest thing is like this feeling of like supreme confidence, you know? You can't be like thinking, oh, my foot might slip or maybe like holding like sometimes if you're a little too attached to maybe the outcome like that you want to send the route that you don't execute at like the most optimal level, you know, maybe you grab on a little too hard to the holds because you really don't want to fall off there, and then because you didn't optimize that section you're too pumped in the end to actually red point. So it's almost like this feeling of like letting go a little bit and just being okay with maybe not sending that time or maybe something happening and just like allowing yourself to try and climb. And I mean, I've had plenty of experiences where, you know, I do that and then I still fall, but it ultimately like allows me at least to reach the point where I'm getting into that flow state. You know, you eventually have the go where you get where you're flowing and you do it perfectly and you reach the last rest and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm here. I'm doing it. And that's such a satisfying feeling to me when you actually climb like that. I think for me at least that's kind of what I look for. You know, I want to reach that point and I kind of get there by finding these cool projects.
Ooh, that was awesome. That was really cool, Tyler. I always think it's funny too, letting it go. It's just it's a funny term to use for climbers because it's all about not letting go. Uh, but I know what you're saying, and I also know that that's the joy. I feel like that's kind of always the goal is to have that flow state. And you said that sometimes it's harder for you to get into it in a rest. And I know that something I struggle with rest is that break sometimes kind of takes me out of the flow state. And so I'm wondering, like, when you have these perfect goes, are you, I don't know, flowing during the rest? Are you thinking about what is for dinner tonight? Like, what goes on in your mind when you're at a good rest and a bad rest?
It is all sorts of things. I don't know if there's a right answer. I say flow, but like it's pretty rare that I actually have like the fully clear mind the whole time I'm climbing. I mean, it's just, you know, it's one thing if it's a boulder or like, you know, you're climbing for a minute, but like if I'm on the wall for 15 minutes, I mean, it's almost impossible to just fully stay present. But I think in the rest, maybe it's less important. You know, you can kind of wander a little bit, but as long as you can get there when you start climbing again. I think as long like when you're climbing, it becomes so much more important because the moment you're out of that like supreme focus, I think you start making tiny mistakes that maybe you don't even realize so obviously, but those are the like the optimization things that I'm saying where it's like maybe a boulder problem it doesn't really matter if you take an extra second to place your foot, but if you're on a 60 move sport climb, like if you take that's an extra minute on the route if you do that every move, and that's going to make a big difference.
The thing I do the worst is that I never use intermediates because I'm always like, dude, I can just reach to the next hole. Why would I use the intermediate? And then it just adds up that extra little bit of effort. And that's that kind of like climbing IQ we were talking about, where you have to have a deep understanding of movement and efficiency to have success over a big 100+ meter pitch, or sorry, 100+ foot pitch, which is what's so fun, man. So uh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that I think like you say climbing IQ, and maybe to some people that would feel like a little inaccessible, like, oh, I just don't have that. So like how do I even know? Maybe I just won't be a super good sport climber, but I think it's actually pretty easy to figure that stuff out with like the time we were saying, like putting in the time. Like you were saying, do you try the do you use the intermediate or not? Well, you should have a go where you use all the intermediates and then have a go where you don't, and then like, well, how did it feel? And then have a go where you use half of them or like one or two of them, and or maybe you use the intermediates at the top and not at the bottom, and like just experimenting. Like I think that is how you gain those skills that you call climbing IQ, but I mean it's just climbing, you know?
Nice, nice. I like that nuance there. And climbing IQ almost makes it sound like something you were born with versus it's a knowledge base that you acquire through effort.
Exactly, yeah. And like you were saying with the rest, it's the same thing with the resting for me. Like on Death of Villains, and I'm shaking my hand one time, and I can't do it the route like that. So, well, my next go, what if I shake 5 times, or what if I see how long I can possibly shake before it seems a little unreasonable, and then I go, and then like like I'm always experimenting whenever I'm trying routes, and it's never like oh, I just have a great climbing IQ, so I know what to do now, you know? It's like this continuous process of always experimenting. And I think that goes back to, why it rewards putting in so much time.
Yeah, dude, that's good. I'm glad you made it accessible versus this idea of like Adam Ondra was just born like this. It's like, nah, dude, he's done a lot of moves. Tyler, you've done a lot of moves. Yeah, you go there every weekend. Uh, okay, on this idea of resting, I just want to pick your brain on knee bars. You can see, actually, you know why that's like a terrible transition? The reason why I made that transition is because historically, knee barring was like, oh, you lock a sinker knee bar and you have no hands rest. Like that's what knee barring was, in the distant past. But now we've seen knee barring become really integral in the hard sport climbing scene. I mean, we were talking about this before. We were able to come up with examples where knee bars were not part of cutting edge sport climbs, but they seem to be more and more part of it. And I'm just wondering if I'm right on that. Like, is technical knee barring becoming crucial for being a 515 sport climber?
In a lot of ways, yeah, I would say so, but I think in a lot of ways it's just really helpful for sport climbing in general because I mean at the end of the day it's a technique, it's not I think some people think like adding some rubber to your knees like, aid or whatever, but I think now we've kind of accepted at least in terms of new modern routes that it's like a totally valid thing to do. And it's just a technique just like heel hooking or any technique like that. And I think there's a pretty high skill cap to that. So I think we're seeing like people who are really, really talented at using their knees. And it's like becoming a style kind of in and of itself. But I mean, it's not a new thing, like I've climbed a decent bit in rifle and knee bars have been around rifle as not just rests, but like moves for many years. So, and I'm not a great person to ask because I'm not an amazing knee bar climber, but I have like massive respect for um, some really good knee bar climbers that I do climb with.
Yeah, I'm not anti knee barring, and I know it's been around for a long time. I don't want to come off that way. I'm just it's I guess what I've noticed now is whenever I watch a cutting edge ascent, or like you were saying, it doesn't have to be just cutting edge. I feel like I'm always seeing them strap up. Like it's just 9 times out of 10. And when I go sport climbing, and I'm typically on limestone in Europe, I basically put pads on no matter what because I just it's something that's kind of built into how I move, and I just kind of naturally look for it, and I think it's cool. But I was just curious if like because you've come up during a time where it's become so prevalent and accepted, like if it's just kind of like yeah, like of course knee bar, gotta know it.
Sort of, but when like looking back, coming from the new, I didn't own a knee bar pad when I climbed at the new. It wasn't like I mean, there were knee bars on routes, but I would do them with some pants on, and I wouldn't think twice about it. And it wasn't until I went to a rifle, really, that I like got my first knee pads and kind of saw that world. And I mean, partly to do with the rock style. Like the new is a lot of face climbing. There's not so many knee bars on a vert face, and then you get to this blocky limestone, and there's tons of places to put your knees. But in terms of hard routes, I mean, almost all of the hard routes in the world are on limestone, and limestone just has a lot more variation. There's a lot more like options for potentially putting your knees on stuff, and when people are spending like, many days on routes like we're seeing now, with all of these like 9B and harder routes, like people are spending so long that, maybe they could do the moves without knees, but just putting your knee against this tiny little, tufa or feature in the wall might make the move a few percent easier even. And that's where we're seeing like the super high level knee barring. It's like the knee bar doesn't even, make the move happen or not. It just like marginally changes the difficulty, or even keeps the difficulty the same, but changes the stress on your forearms. So you're just like maybe increasing like the endurance capacity for like these people to do the highest end things. And I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I like that thing you said where it isn't even necessarily make the move easier. It just moves the difficulty to a different part of your body. It's that classic thing like spreading the pump around. But something that I struggle with is even knowing which beta is best sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, I can do it like this. I can do it like this. And I guess, there's not a big question here because it's like, well, experiment, like try these things, see it come out. But it just shows you when you get down to that idea of making it 1% easier, you have to have some like deep knowledge of your body and introspection. And even though you can like test things, like testing things still requires you to then ask yourself, like, was that better? Was that easier? And that's not like a simple question for me to always answer.
No, it's not. It's actually really hard. And a lot of times, because on nearly every route, there's going to be many options. And when it comes down to like these moves that feel kind of the same difficulty, and I'm not really sure which one to go with, I almost always will go with the one that I just enjoy more. Like, if I really can't decide, I'm just like, well, I like this move more. And, I'd rather do it. If I want to switch it up later in the process, I can. But for now on my links, I just feel like doing this one move more, so I'm gonna do it. And I mean, I think when it comes to on-sighting, that can be the most important actually when you're doing the moves for the first time, and there's obviously many options. And it's like, well, which move do you want to do? And you can get lost in this thought process of which one do I pick, which hole do I go to. And for me, like I had this revolution or revelation in my on sighting when I just was like, I'm just gonna go for the hold that I feel like going for from the other holds, and not think too much about it. And I actually think that can kind of change how you approach like doing a route for the first try.
Interesting. So you're saying, like, let's say I'm on a couple of underclings and one's better. You just are like, dude, I don't know. I just feel good on this right hand. So even though it looks like it might cross me up, like up there, I'm going to like commit to the move or the hold that I like better. Is that, am I reading that right?
Sort of. I mean, it depends kind of how you have to look at it like long term, not just one move, but many moves ahead. So if I think it's going to cross me up, then I probably wouldn't do that. But if it's like I can obviously see that there's another hold further right, and I like that option to cross over, then I'm just, sure, I'll do that. I really learned the skill at the red, where there's usually a lot of down pulling holds and a ridiculous number of options a lot of the time. And I see people. I would try an on-site routes. I don't want to say I would see other people, but I mean I do. But for me, I would try an on-site routes, and I'm like sitting there like, oh, which one's the best hold? Which foothold's the best hold? And I'm like looking, and I'm like thinking, and that whole process is so much more taxing than it would be just to take the holds that immediately I see and am relatively comfortable on, and just keep going at a quick pace. Even if the moves aren't fully optimized, it ends up, being more efficient.
All right. That's interesting because I'd say that so I really like on-sighting. We should talk more about on-sighting, but where my on-sights often go wrong is when I'm just kind of cruising along, having a blast, and then all of a sudden I get shook and I'm like, oh, this doesn't go the way I thought it was going to go, and I feel like I'm supposed to do this, but I don't want to. Do you know what I mean? Like you're like, like I think it's a Gaston, but like that just feels awkward. Like, yeah, that's where my onsights go bad is like all of a sudden I go from cruising along to like somehow all of my power is expended in like one move or not even in the move, in like preparing for the move. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, that's where on-sighting gets really difficult because maybe you could do the move several ways. And I mean, maybe like what happens at the new a lot of the time is you'll take the hold with one hand that you think seems obvious, and it ends up as you have the wrong hand and there's no other holds to go to. So you can either reverse the move or you might just fall off. And I've not on-sighted 511s because of that at the new. Just taking the hold with the wrong hand and being in a position where I can't go to anything. So it comes like this like game of luck almost, but you almost have to just like you're better off just committing to one way than not committing to anything at all because maybe you're just gonna fall because you committed to the wrong thing, but if you don't commit and you expect you expend all your energy trying to think about committing, then it ends up as the outcome's the same.
That explains why when I see people on site at a really high level, it almost looks like they know the route already because they're just going for it. They're acting as if they're just like, yeah, it must be this side pull, of course. Like there's not much chalk on it, but it feels like it's in the right place, so I'm going to commit to it. Yeah. Tell me more about about on-sighting and just your joy of it. You said something like you thought on-sighting is special because you called it like it's an exam, and I don't know what you mean by that exactly.
I think that climbing or on-site climbing is like the ultimate test in sport climbing at least because the ability to just roll up and not have any information and just like I'm throw your rope down, I'm gonna climb this route right now and being able to do it. And I mean you're kind of almost better than that route in that moment at least, which I mean it's pretty cool. And I think it's a really special like thing to get to go do, having no information and just having to like problem solve your way up the route. I think it's pretty awesome. And you can have these like really engaging and like difficult climbing experiences, even if the route doesn't have like a really hard number attached to it. Because sometimes the grade doesn't really reflect the difficulty of the on-site. I've climbed on-site 512 on-sites at the new that I found like very difficult and I was pretty proud of. And then 513 on-sites that at the red that I maybe didn't feel so strongly about because they just didn't take the same amount of problem solving to get through.
There's something about problem solving on the fly that just feels good because when you are in that flow state, I don't know if it's like problem solving in the sense of, I mean, sometimes you do have those moments where you are kind of shook and you have to figure it out. But sometimes your body, you just kind of let go and your body just kind of follows the rock as it should be. And yeah, I have a thing for on-sighting too. So I don't know. I love hearing more about it, but I don't know if tricks for on-sighting is the way, but like, what do you do to prep for a route? Are you busting out binoculars? Just like, what do you do when you show up and you actually do want to on-site something?
Definitely not the binoculars. I um Honestly, I really try and on-site any routes that seem reasonable for me to try and on-site. And I always like to spend a little time. I mean, if I'm at a crag that I haven't, like I have routes that I haven't climbed that are at an on-site level, I would always try and do one of them as a second warm-up, or if something's like at my warm-up level, I would do, maybe two on-sites to warm up. I mean, it's something that I just enjoy doing, so it's pretty easy for me to want like to find the motivation or time. When you really want to just go do something, it's like, oh, well, I need to warm up for my project anyway. Might as well go warm up on this 8A that I haven't done rather than like the route that I always warm up on or whatever. But I would say when it comes to there's no tricks really, but maybe just having some confidence to just like throw your rope down and like who cares if you fail? You know, it doesn't really matter, right? And for me, like I used to really not like on-sighting actually. I used to get really frustrated when I would just fall at all. Like that would I had a lot of experiences like that where I'm like, oh, I'd rather have tried to flash this because I think I could have and I didn't because I tried to onsite it. And now like I have a more like holistic view and like of what it's like to onsite, and it's such a different experience that I've kind of learned to be happy with the effort rather than the outcome, and just like I enjoy the experience of just trying hard, not knowing what to expect, and like the uncertainty almost in if I'm gonna succeed, even if it's like a easier route, is kind of like where the fun is, you know? Like if you just know, if it's like a route that's below your level and you know if your friend flashes you up it, you'll be able to flash it. Like, is that cool? If you just know like there's a very strong chance you're gonna do it. Whereas maybe that's the route you should try an on-site because, it might be a real challenge and you might not have that certainty.
You said that you gotta have self confidence when you go up to these, and I don't think this just applies to onsighting. I think it applies to almost any route, but it's something that I struggle with in 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 onsighting. But even if I'm gonna like go up and project wrap, we'll just keep it onsighting. Like I'll look at something and I'll see, oh, like geez, that distance between the second and third bolt like actually looks really big. I'm sure that means it's easy. Maybe I hope, I'm not actually sure where the clipping stance is. And I definitely can just fully psych myself out at any grade too. And yeah, like how do you show up and be your most confident self when you're on sighting something that is intimidating?
It partly comes from experience of having tried many on sites that I was like not prepared for and it ending up being fine. But it certainly can be intimidating, especially if you don't, there's not much chalk maybe, or you have to hang the quick draws. That can be like an intimidating experience. I mean, you have to remind yourself that whoever bolted the route was probably not a crazy person, so it's probably safe. Like, I mean, we generally have to assume that these routes are safe that we're climbing on, because sport climbing, I mean, in my experience, is really a very safe activity. So it's not like you're going to put yourself into a dangerous situation. So you can kind of remind yourself that. And I mean, there's not really a way around the learning curve other than just like spending the time to do it and working your way up the grades. But I mean, the only way to become not intimidated by a thing is, to expose yourself to the thing.
I can't tell you how many onsites I've blown because I clip from like a crux hold that I lock off on and reach just to do, and I do the move and it's literally a jug. And I mean, I'm saying all this stuff because I talk to myself about this at the bottom of a climb. It's like, look, that the bolt's there because it's probably a good clipping stance. Like you think you're scared and run out, but someone's fallen there before. Like you're going to be fine. You don't, it's easier to clip from above than below. Like I talk to myself about all this stuff, but I think I like what you're saying where you can't get around being intimidated, confronting the fear and having success and a little bit of success over and over again in all these situations. It just adds up. It's just, again, it rewards effort put in. All right. I want to ask a little bit more about your experience on Death of Villains and Full Metal Brisket, which are the two 515s you've done. But I also want to ask why you chose those and what makes a sport climb attractive to you. Because you made a comment earlier about, oh, I'm like, you know, 100 feet up on like a slab on like a limestone face, the VRG, and you were just talking about how beautiful it was, and just like what attracts you to lines, and why those ones?
I mean, there's a lot of things that can be enticing about a route. For me, like it ultimately comes down to the movement. Like, and I think just climbing in general, movement is pretty cool. Like, it doesn't have to be a very good route for me to still enjoy it. So when it comes to just like routes that I will try almost anything just because I just enjoy climbing and there's something that's fun about like discovering a route that maybe not so many people have done. And that can be just as fun as doing a classic route at the crag. But it's a little different when it comes to picking something that's gonna be really hard and I'm gonna both of those climbs I spent a pretty substantial amount of time on.
Well, let's
Um,
start with Full Metal Brisket, because that was kind of a interesting one where you said you had tried it while it was still a project.
yes, so I actually tried Full Metal Brisket probably after not long after I'd climbed my first like 514 even. The Coliseum where that route is, it was the first crag I climbed at the new, and I have spent probably more days there than any other crag in the world. So naturally, along that timeline, I saw the project. It had been tried before by a number of notable climbers, and I'd known that, so I was kind of like I was interested just to see what it was. Like it's the king line of the crag that I had climbed at so much, and it had permadraws even, so I was like, sure, I'll go up and try the moves. And it was pretty far above me when I initially tried it. Like the holds are bad and it's really strange the climbing. Like the sequences weren't immediately obvious, and I never tried anything harder than 14B when I did that or when I tried that route. And I remember being up there, like, trying moves and trying sections and just like, this is the next level. This is what 14C feels like. Like, this is it. And I was so psyched right away. Like, I kind of, even when I first tried it, I was like, this is a route that I want to do at some point. Not because of the difficulty, just because of like kind of what it meant to me being at the crag that I kind of learned to climb at almost, and being such a, I mean, it really is an obvious line going to, it's the tallest one in the whole crag. It's really cool.
Yeah, dude, I'll point people towards your video because it was a really cool video. It just looked so good. I think I said earlier, like never been to the new. I haven't seen a ton of media. I don't know, just I haven't. And I was like, damn, that looks good, and it's got the cool hang too. Like you're isn't there like I don't want to say it's a beach, but it's like there's water right behind you, and it was tall, and the sequence looked I don't know looked awesome. Yeah, so uh, how long? Yeah, how many how many days did you put into it?
It's really hard to say because that initial try. Do I even call that a day? That was probably 3 years before I actually ended up doing it. But I probably didn't try it again until after Jonathan had done it. And I thought in my mind, I was like, I hadn't even tried a 14C at that point. I was like, this is the next level. This is what 14, hard 514 is. And then Jonathan comes and does the first ascent and calls it 15A. And it kind of like shifted my whole like world view on like what kind of hard sport climbing looked like. And it was like, oh, okay, if this is 15A, then I need to go try like other 14 plus routes because, like I've always had the feeling that like I would want to build a pyramid, as they say, like have your climbing resume kind of build you up to the hardest thing you're gonna do. And I was kind of doing that while I was trying the route. So I would have these sessions on it, just like trying moves, trying like tiny, like 3 move boulder problems. And when I was miles away from being strong enough to be able to do it, and the whole time like training and trying other routes too, like putting more dedicated effort into other routes. And there were a few different trips that kind of like showed me that I was maybe finally ready to like actually try like put in, not the odd day here and there, but like dedicated, um, like a dedicated effort to it. And when I started that, I probably had maybe 20 sessions over like a fall and a spring season before doing it. But I mean, up until then, I may have had just as many where it was so far above my level that it was more of like I'm bouldering and training my fingers.
I wonder if it hadn't been a project, if you would have gotten on it, or if you had been at of you said you'd never try anything harder than 14B, and if it had that 15A grade, you might have stayed away from. I'd like to ask about that, but then I also want to ask about those trips that changed your mind, that made you think, hey, maybe I'm ready.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would have waited a lot longer to try it at least. Because when there's no number attached to it, you're kind of just like, is it even possible? Like, it's a cool looking line. It helped that it shared a start with a 13B that I had done, and like I actually climbed that 13B a lot. Like I a lot is like an understatement. Like I may have climbed this 13B like 300 or 400 times. Like I really enjoyed doing training laps on this 13B, and so it being kind of an extension off this 13B, it was pretty easy to just like, oh well, I'll go up and play on some moves and just like do some new climbing because I just did loads of my training at this one cliff. But yeah, it wasn't ever with the idea that I was gonna I knew that I was going to send the route one day, but when I was trying it, it was kind of like, that one day might be many years from now, even. It wasn't like next year or something I'm going to be ready to send it. It was kind of like I'm preparing for this thing that is going to come much further down the line. And those trips, I guess, would have been. I think the trip I went to Rifle for the first time was a pretty influential trip for me. I had climbed 14C at that point. I climbed Southern Smoke at the Red River Gorge,
Nice.
which that it didn't give me like I didn't climb that route and was like, oh, I'm ready to climb 515 now or anything. It wasn't an easy route for me by any means, but I went to Rifle for like 2.5 weeks, and I got in. Like I hadn't spent much time climbing on limestone at that point, and Rifle is like pretty cool. It's really condensed with how many hard routes there are. You go to the Wicked Cave and it's like 14 plus, 14 plus, 14 plus, and I'd never been to a crag like that ever. So it was like, this is the place to train, I guess, for climbing 14 plus, 515, whatever. And so I like wanted to start with the easy one and move over at a crag like that where the levels were a little more appropriate. I didn't see 515 as like the grade I should be trying to do. It was kind of a little too intimidating, and I also don't think I had the level for it at that point. But I went to Rifle and I wanted to try Zulu actually, and I drove by myself from Virginia, and I got into to Rifle. I did it in 2 days and got in around 10 p.m. And I was meeting some friends there, and so I got in at 10 p.m. and I rode up to the campsite, and my friend was like, are you psyched? Like we can go climbing right now if you want. And I was like, yes. Like, can we go to the Wicked Cave right now? And he was like, yeah, I'll come belay you. I have some lights. So we lit up the Wicked Cave, and my first pitch ever, I was like, I want to go check out Zulu. Didn't even do a warm up, and I I was climbing it and doing the moves. I remember getting so flash pumped. I mean, I got out of the car 2 days of driving straight and trying to do Zulu no warm up, getting so flash pumped, and I remember getting I'm doing like one bolt at a time, and I'm like man, this is really hard for 14A. And eventually I got to the anchors and I was like, this is really hard for 14A. Like, wow, I'm not quite at the level that I was kind of hoping I would be. And I kind of was like, man, these anchors don't really seem like how they looked in the guidebook. And I'm like looking around and I got down and realized I had gone up the crew
Oh
instead of
wow.
Zulu because I just like had read the guidebook wrong and it was quite dark. And I was like, okay, this is like 14C. This makes a lot more sense. And so I was like, so psyched then. So I tried that again that night and ended up doing the crew a few days later as my second 14C. And I was like, here we go. Like, I think I leveled up and I ended up climbing another 14C that trip. And it was definitely like kind of a mindset shift to like what these hard grades really are. And like maybe I can climb on them.
Dude, that is freaking hilarious that you drove 2 days straight, show up at 10, and then start climbing hard 514 with lights. And Zulu is a 14A, which is a super classic 14A that is just beautiful. And I can't believe you end up on 14C. And then I think the part that you slipped in there that cracked me up the most is you tried it again that night. The crew, you tried it again that night.
Yeah, I did. After I'd figured out.
Oh man. Um, That's awesome. That is a hell of a. That's why I like talking to the younger generation. It reminds me of that psych of just like you just show up and you're like, well, why wouldn't I climb? And for me, I'm like, well, dude, because I've been sitting in a car for 2 days and it's like midnight. But that sounds like a blast. So take me then to Death of Villains, which is on the West Coast. Or, well, I don't know, coast. It's in the West and very different rock. And it was more recent of a ascent for you. So you got your footing under you. You were like, oh, I can do hard grades. You put in those days into Full Metal Brisket, but Death of Villains is different.
Definitely. And there is some separation between those. I climbed Full Metal Brisket over 2 years ago. So between then and this winter I've done like some more climbing, tried many more hard routes, and I didn't say this earlier, but when I did Full Metal Brisket, I'd never even climbed a 9A route. I never even tried one actually.
Wow.
So or maybe I tried Life of Villains actually. I think I did try Life of Villains just before. But basically, yeah, I guess that's where I should start is the winter after I did that trip to Rifle, I went to the Hurricane and get some more limestone climbing on. It just like kind of weird crags. Like most people would not think you drive across the country to go to the Hurricane, but because of like winter break and how it lined up when I was in college, it was like Rifle in the summer, Hurricane in the winter. It just like made sense. So I went to the Hurricane and started, I just worked my way up the routes and I eventually did Flight of the Concords that trip, which shares like the ending with Life of Villains. And then I started trying Life of Villains, which I remember feeling like it was really above my head, but actually looking back on it, I think I one hung the route like that same trip. It was like two weeks I spent there. And it sounds more impressive than it is actually. I think the difficulty in that route is like from one hanging to like actually linking everything is a big jump because of how, power endurance style it is. But I ended up coming back on a road trip that summer. So I had done Full Metal Brisket in like February, and then summer rolls around, and we did like a 3 month road trip, and started in the Hurricane. So I went there in May. I spent a month trying Life of Villains, and eventually did it towards the end of that trip. Pretty heinous, I will say. Like May is not the season you really climb in the Hurricane, but
No.
people think it's like way more intense than it was. I was waking up at like either like 5 a.m. or so, and we were climbing by like 8 a.m. and then like just being done really early, but actually the temps were okay. But I did that route. It took me a decent bit of effort, but um, so we finished out that road trip, and at that point, like Death of Villains hadn't even been done before, but I still had other routes in the Hurricane, so I kind of knew I was gonna go back. And then Joe had kind of told me about the route, and then Kai did the first ascent, and it seemed like pretty obvious that I would, in the wintertime go back and try Death of Villains. It's sort of like a link up, I guess. So you do Life of Villains, like most of the hard climbing on that route, and then you end up, rather than like doing this exiting section, you go into like another endurance section, adding maybe like 4 or 5 more bolts to the route. So it was just kind of like obvious that I would go and try that route when I get the chance. And now I'm like out in Salt Lake, and was kind of, I've been doing a lot of traveling, and was just like, well, I need something to project in the winter. That was the route that jumped out at me. And so I spent most of I guess the last like 2 months in St. George, climbing not just in the Hurricane, but at the BRG and some other walls out there, but mainly focused on Death of Villains.
Well, congrats. That's a nice second ascent to grab. And it looked way different. It looks way different than Full Metal Brisket. Like it's cool to, I don't know, maybe, I don't know why I think it's cool, but it's nice to send hard or at your limit outside of your home crag. Like sometimes you just feel like, oh, well, I had that dialed for a decade or something, and going to a new style and having success. Like I just feel like that you're building your pyramid, even though you skip 14D, which is hilarious. Uh, and yeah, I was just wondering, like, that is a really interesting story where you had like these mindset shifts where you're like, oh, like I tried Full Metal Brisket when it was a project. I was like, this is what 14C is like. And then you went to rifle and you thought that something was a 14A, ended up being a 14C. And these kind of things like change your view of climbing, because you go like, oh, that's the grade. Okay, cool. Like on to the next then. And I'm just wondering what you're going to do now and what your plans are for trying harder routes, and how you might, how they might affect your climbing philosophy now. Because, like what if I tossed you on, 15C, you go like, oh, okay, that's 15C. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually have no idea. I think if I tried a 15C, I'd get my ass completely kicked. So I don't think I have any plans of doing that anytime soon. But um, like routes like Jumbo Love really intrigue me a lot. It's like kind of the obvious next step, and I don't have any plans to go try it. I'm still kind of in the, like, it's a little above me. Maybe if I climbed another 15A, maybe I'd have a little more confidence, but I don't know. I have a hard time with that stuff because I'm like, well, I need to build the pyramid and I want to feel like I belong there trying the route, which is like a little bit nonsense, like everyone is should try any route, right? But I feel like a little bit like that about just myself, like I would feel like I don't belong on the route. But it's really hard. I mean, ultimately, I'm gonna have to go find another project here pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying, I asked you, I was like, well, how many 515s are even in America? And it just seems like America isn't necessarily the best place to, find, to build your pyramid in the low 15s. Because yeah, I mean, I don't know, we don't have as much density. It's, like you were saying earlier, driving 5 hours doesn't sound so bad to you. And I know you've traveled a bit. Like, what's the sport climbing scene like in Europe for you compared to here in America?
I think in Europe it's a little more serious. Like I half jokingly say that like 14A in America is 9A in Europe. Like the similar number of people maybe do that. At least it feels like that sometimes. The times that I've been climbing in Europe, but you go there. There's a lot more hard routes to do, basically, in between Spain and France. I mean, we just don't have quite that amount of limestone at that quality. It just doesn't quite exist in America. And it's not that we don't have potential for hard routes, but I think for quality and quantity, like you really have to go to Europe, and it's hard to beat.
I do think part of that thing of having people who climb X grade has to do with X grade being prevalent. You know, like if everyone's
Definitely.
crag has 9A, like if literally everyone's just like, oh yeah, my local crag has 9, like, I mean, your story around Full Metal Brisket is, dude, it's the king lining up my crag. Like, so of course I always had my eye on it. But if most of our crags don't have that kind of, it makes it less likely for people to rise to the occasion.
Definitely. And I think as sport climbing keeps growing, like it will keep growing, even if it's not quite at the rate that we see bouldering exploding right now, it will, and we're going to see more hard routes go up. Even if we don't have quite the quality of rock that you find in Catalonia, it doesn't really matter, right? You don't need amazing rock quality to have hard rock climbs. So we're still gonna see that happen, even if there may be like, you go to Europe to do the best routes in the world. You know, we're, there's something special about doing something at your home crag that is really hard for you.
Tell me more about some of your favorite crags in Europe.
I honestly haven't spent like that much time in Europe. I went to Spain for the first time last winter, like about a year ago, and I went to Sirona. And that, I mean, amazing, amazing wall. The El Padi wall was something that I've always wanted to check out, and I will certainly go back there pretty soon. And then last summer, I spent about 3 months climbing in France, a lot of it in Seus, but also at some other crags. And I don't know, I couldn't tell you a favorite wall that I have. Seus was amazing, but it's definitely like after going there once, I've satisfied that itch a little bit for a little while. I mean, I'm certainly gonna go back, but it's not the next thing that I'm gonna do. But I I almost enjoy climbing at new walls more than climbing at maybe just the same best wall over and over again. Something about like getting to go and try a new style, or just climbing on a new section, new routes, new moves is just like my favorite thing to do.
That's onsighting, you know, new
Exactly.
moves, new experiences. Yeah, I like asking about Europe because it's like, I don't know. Sometimes we put it on a pedestal, but you know, you've climbed a lot in America. And it's like, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like people often, it's that grass is always greener on the other side. Like, and you said, you know, oh, it's like Catalonia has the best stone and stuff, and I feel like, well, look at like Yosemite, or you know, or like, I don't know. Like I always just question where like maybe we do have like some of the best sport climbing in our backyards, just not historically where sport climbing has been focused. And you know, sometimes that can change. In 50 years, it might be like, no, it's all about, I don't know, the red, or it's all about, I don't know. I'm sure you know, back to Smith Rock. I don't know, some like famous, you know, crag here that we just haven't developed enough yet.
I will say that I didn't say Catalonia has the best stone. It has the best potential for hard climbing. West Virginia has the best stone. I'm legally obligated to say that.
I saw you shaking your head. You're like, no, dude, no, no, no. And it's totally true. I'm not, I love limestone. I love Catalunya. But yeah, best stone is definitely the wrong way to put it. Thank you for correcting that. You may be obligated by law to say it's in Virginia, but I feel like that's just the truth too, where it's that stuff breaks. There's a lot of glue. That's okay. But don't go there thinking that you won't break a foot off even on the classic. Yeah, just a PSA.
Definitely. Not all sandstone. West Virginia is, I mean, maybe there's better sandstone somewhere else, but I haven't I haven't gotten to climb on it yet.
Can't wait to visit. Okay, man, I'm gonna ask you this one question that I think is hilarious because we were talking about before, and it's this idea of what do you think is harder, climbing your first V10 or your first 13B, or we can like shift those grades. And just for context, it's like, okay, you start climbing, you're a boulderer, or you start climbing, you're a sport climber. And V10 is like definitely, I don't know, a benchmark grade. You're like, dude, psyched to climb V10. And I wonder what the equivalent is in sport climbing, and then kind of like why the journeys might be different. If that's a big question. I'm sorry, that was really drawn out.
Sure, yeah. Definitely a lot harder to climb V10. I mean, right off the bat, I would shift the grades a little bit. Maybe like V8 and 13B are more comparable, like physically, but I also bet that we could talk to plenty of boulders who would maybe have a lot easier of a time climbing V10 or even harder, because they're just such different experiences. I mean, you're testing whether someone has the ability to, a V10, sometimes it's like, can you just do this crux move? And if you can, you just end up doing the boulder. And depending on how prepared you are for that crux move, I mean, sometimes V10s people do, very quickly, even if that's like a hard level for them, just because, I mean, bouldering is so accessible. You try the move 20 times and you end up doing your V10 in a session, and you go up to the 13B and you do the moves quickly, and you do the obvious links, and then you're too tired to give it more goes, so you have to take a rest day or something. And so you just end up having like maybe a higher barrier to doing the easier thing.
Yeah, I'm going to take, yeah, you're right, where maybe V10 is physically harder. But I think what I would argue is like if someone is like, assuming they were the same person, like if someone is kind of naturally predisposed to climbing hard or whatever, like they're going to get strong quickly. I just feel like you can take someone and they don't know what they're doing, and then they can do V10. Like you were saying, maybe part of the reasons why bouldering has become more popular is because of the quick success people find after getting strong on a board. They go outside. Wow, I can do that. I know what this kind of move is like. So I feel like you could take someone and just kind of, marionette them up V10, but you have to like really earn 13B. Like you have to, keep your breathing in check. You have to have efficiency, like that thing, like that rewards time climbing. So I don't know. I almost feel like if we took two people of similar ability and then started them out on their journeys, that they might end up doing V10 before 13B. But I'm just trying to stir the pot and be difficult.
It kind of depends on 13B too, because I mean, if we're talking like Fall of Man in the VRG, I would 100% agree with you. And in fact, I think there's a lot of people who would find V10 maybe a lot easier than doing that route if they're just coming straight from a gym. But then, maybe like a steeper, more straightforward thing might, be a lot easier for that person. So I think like with route climbing, I mean, you could even change the style in the V10 too, right? So it kind of depends on what we're looking at and like what you know, our made up climbers are, what their skills look like. But I like this experiment.
Yeah, I can totally find V10s that will they kick my ass and they will play people's ass, and you go like, oh, that's V10. How come there's no holds on it? Like we should put some holds on it, you guys. Okay, well, I was just think that's fun. I always use it as an experiment too, to kind of also remind myself how much growth I can have in sport climbing, and that whatever grade that I might boulder on the board kind of should theoretically allow me to have success in sport climbing at a higher level. But then like that not climbing IQ, climbing knowledge base I must build up is, only going to be rewarded with lots of time, and taking away that physicality of it is kind of exciting and fun. And I don't know, I love diving back into that idea of just learning how to climb, spending time on the rock, finding how to rest, finding how to move beautifully. And those are really fun experiences versus just crushing a V10 on the tension board too, which is pretty heinous, to be honest. Okay, Tyler, last question for you. How do you go from good to great?
I don't want to say that it just comes down to the amount of time that you put in, because I don't think that's quite true. But I do think that there is like this element of you need to spend the time with like enough focus to be able to like do the thing that you want to do, right? And so like good to great, like what does that even mean? Like we can put like like grade numbers on that, but in reality, it's probably you're just looking at, we're talking like the maximum potential that any person might have, and that looks very different, And at the end of the day, I mean, to reach that level that you ultimately theoretically could reach, it's going to be pretty difficult, and you're going to need to have a very focused, like intentional attitude towards it. And for me, that looks like going out to a route and I look at the route and I'm like, what exactly do I need to do to get up this route? Like to send it, and being like very honest about that too. Not like, oh well, like some people love to say that they need to train harder to do that thing, but if you're climbing V10 on the board and the thing that you're trying to do is like 513, I mean, that's not what the thing you need to be working on to actually succeed on that route. It's more about, you probably don't have the fitness. You probably need to spend more time on that route. And I mean, and it's not just showing up either, right? It needs to be more intentionally motivated to do the exact thing that you want to do. Ultimately, it comes down to this like motivation, right? Like you have to, with everything, you have to want to do that thing, whatever it is that's great, like becoming great. And it's like you need to be thinking about it when you go to bed and when you wake up. It's like the thing that you want to do in your life. And for me, it's like it's hard sport climbing. I mean, and when I look at a route, it's not about like, can I do it? Is it possible? It's going to be like, okay, I need these things to do this route, and I'm going to find a way to get those things and do the route no matter what.
Good answer, dude. Good answer. Yeah, the first of all, I really like that description of greatness, the idea that it's reaching your fullest potential. I feel like that's a good definition of great.
Yeah, I think so. I think because some people aren't like some people can climb really hard without needing to put all that much in, They're just genetic kind of like anomalies, but they just have a higher like cap to that potential, right? And then greatness just kind of has a different meaning for those people.
Now it's worth pointing out, and just like you were saying, climbing isn't necessarily a sport. We can do it as a sport. We can compete, but you know, most of us don't, right? Like, or it's a part of our life. We do it. And even the great comp climbers, you see them transition out of it. Or some people, even when they have great success in comps, they want to do, real climbing. I don't know what to call it, climbing. And so I just think that's an important thing to point out, where when you're really looking for greatness, it's kind of like it's your own personal journey. And, you may not have the genetics to climb the world's first, 516B. It just may not happen. I don't know what to say. I know it's not in the cards for me, at least. And I also like that idea of being really honest with yourself about what it takes to do the thing that's in front of you. I think that's hard. I think that's easy to say, but hard to actually internalize. I know I'm guilty of that.
I think it's really hard to do actually. To
Yeah.
to be like what do I really need to do? It's easy to say, oh, I need to do more training or something, but it can be really hard to say like this route is a little too hard for me, but not because of my training, but because of like my, maybe it's your skills in one way or another. And then, how do you develop those skills? Well, it might not have anything to do with training in the gym or something, but it might have something to do with projecting other routes with that route in mind that you need to do. And yeah, it can be really hard.
It also ties into that, not just putting in time, like you said, putting in time is required, but it's not everything. So you might be like, oh, I do need to train. But then if you just kind of show up and half ass it, it's not really training. If you show up and try the route, but you're not really trying, you're not really there, you can't, what they say, practice doesn't make perfect, like perfect practice makes perfect. I don't know if I got that right, but just the idea of you have to show up time and time again with the right intention, with the taking the hard lessons to heart, being like, okay, maybe you do need stronger fingers because that crimp is mandatory. Maybe you do have to train, maybe it's not just skills, but then really narrowing down your focus and then keeping consistent. Good stuff, man.
Nice. Yeah. You said that much more concisely than I did, but that was good. You should have a podcast or something. You're pretty good.
Well, I need help from guys like you to give me the beautiful idea that I can hopefully whittle down and just repeat to you. So I thought actually your answer was really good, and I'm just trying to glom onto it and say it just like you did. So good stuff, Tyler. Congrats. You still are a young gun, man. Maybe you don't realize it because you're not 16 anymore. But it seems like your trajectory is just a really fun one. And I know you're kind of on the road climbing a bunch, and I do encourage you to go hop on a 15C, even if it kicks your ass.
Yeah, thanks, man. Maybe I'll take you up. Maybe I'll try find a 15B here one of these days to go get my ass kicked on.
Yeah, it sounds fun, man. All right, take care, man. I'll see you when you do tick that 15B or 15C.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for the chat.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.